I'm Chris Wecker, and I'm here today on November 12th, 2010, to interview June Enrietto for the Louisville Historical Society. We wanted to thank you for doing this, Jim. Okay, so please tell us what your full name is and your birth date and where you were born.
Well, I was born in Louisville, June 3rd, 1926. My name's June Giorzelli Enrietto.
Okay, and your grandparents came here from Italy, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and what were your grandparents' names?
My maternal grandparents
Yes, your maternal
was
grandparents.
Angelo and Maria Bottinelli.
Okay, and they came here from Italy. Do you know what town they were from?
They were from a small town called Caporizzaggio and around Lake Como area.
Okay, okay. And they came in what year?
About, let's see, around probably between 1900 and 1902,
Okay.
I would think.
Okay, sounds good. And your paternal grandparents?
They came probably about 1896,
Okay,
and they're from northern Italy, but I don't know the exact name of the village.
okay. And their names were?
Were Peter and Antonio Giorzelli.
Okay. Do you know why they came to America?
I have no.
Okay. Did they have family here before they came?
Well, my grandfather Giorzelli had a sister here,
Okay.
and my grandfather Bottinelli had two brothers, and that's how he happened to come. His two brothers were here. There were three Bottinelli families in Louisville.
There was quite an age difference too, wasn't there, with the brothers?
Yes, one of his brothers was 18 years older than he was.
Wow.
That was here,
Okay.
and his name there was Peter and Baptist.
Okay. Do you remember anything about your grandparents?
Oh yes, I remember I remember my grandparents.
What do you remember about them?
Well, I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents. We of course had Sunday dinners every Sunday, and I spent a lot of time for about when I was about 5 years old. My parents moved to Oak Creek, which is in Routt County,
Oh, okay.
near Steamboat.
Over by Steamboat. Okay.
And I stayed here with my grandparents because I went to kindergarten at St. Louis School.
Okay. So you spent most of your time here.
I did.
Maternal grandparents. Okay. And you went to school here, so did you go back and forth to Oak Creek?
I think my mother used to come down frequently to see us, rather than us going up there.
What do you remember about, did your grandfather work the coal mines?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So when he came, he worked the coal mines
He
right
worked
away?
the coal mines, I'm
Do you
sure.
remember which ones he worked?
No, I don't know.
There were quite a few during those times.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. I think perhaps by the time I was old enough to remember, he maybe was retired, not
Oh,
working
okay.
anymore.
Okay. Where did they live in Louisville?
They lived on Front Street, and this, I don't know the address, but it's the house that I was born in
Okay.
on Front Street.
Okay. Was it near Steinbaugh's, where Steinbaugh's used to be?
No, it's on, I need to clear my throat.
Okay, go ahead.
It was in the 1000 block.
Okay.
Probably 1013, something like that. There was a house on the corner, and then my Hebicks lived next door, and then my grandparents, and Frankini's, and on the corner was DeSantis's
Oh, okay.
in that block. Right.
Did they bring a lot of culture from Italy? Did they cook Italian food and celebrate in Italian ways for the holidays? Or
My grandparents didn't, because northern Italy, they were from northern Italy, and then people from northern Italy had different customs than the people from southern Italy. And I think the people from southern Italy had more traditional dinners and so forth. Like, for instance, my mother said when she was a youngster, a young girl. Her friends were all, their parents were all Southern Italian, and they all had spaghetti all the time. And my mother said to my grandmother, "Why don't we ever have spaghetti?" They never had spaghetti. And my grandmother says, "Well, I don't know how to make it." She said, "We're from northern Italy, and our dish is rice, risotto." It's just that's what we have. And they didn't keep the tradition of the Christmas Eve like the Southern Italians, the 7 fishes. I didn't do that as a child.
Okay.
We do that now because Barbara kind of adopted the tradition and custom.
Okay. When we had Little Italy across the tracks, were there a lot of people from northern Italy and southern Italy that lived there?
You know, I think there were more from southern Italy. I think some of the people that lived up. You want to know some of the people that lived in that Little Italy were
Sure.
there were the Rosses, the Rizais, Domenicos. Who else did my mother used to talk about? But and they were more from southern Italy. I think the Domenicos and maybe my mother's family were from the northern Italy. But I think the majority of the people, the Italians here, were from southern Italy.
Okay. Interesting. Now, your paternal grandparents, did your paternal grandfather also work in the coal mines?
You know, I really don't know much about my I they died when I was much younger, and well, my grandmother lived longer. I do remember her, but my grandfather, I really don't remember. He, I really don't remember too much about him at all.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your mom and dad? Their names and
Well, my
when they were
mother's
born?
name was Stella Bottinelli, and my dad was Joseph Giorzelli. And he had a nickname of Pip because his mother always called him by his name in Italian, Peppino, Joseph, for Joseph. And so he got the nickname Pip from his
Okay. So his name was really Joseph, but
his
she
name
called
was
him
really
Peppino.
Joseph.
Okay.
But everybody knew him as Pip.
Okay.
Hmm.
And you were an only child?
The only child.
Okay. And where did you live where did your parents live?
Well, I was born on Front Street in my grandparents' house, and I think I was about 9 months old. My mother said when they moved up to 1013 Lafarge, which I lived all my life, you know.
Right.
And then my dad's parents lived on 1000 Lafarge, which is where I live now. That was their house. So I never moved off of Lafarge.
Right, so you were in the one block the whole time. Were you born at home or in a hospital?
I was born at home.
Okay, so you had a midwife?
There was a doctor in town named Dr. Davis at that time, but he had a midwife, and her name was, they all called her Zia Porter. Now, Zia in Italian means aunt, but everybody called her Zia Porter. And she happened to be a sister to my grandfather, Peter Giorzelli. They were brother and sister.
Okay. Wow.
And she usually delivered all the babies.
Okay, okay.
And also at that time, Mrs. Perella was a midwife.
Okay. Now, what did your father do?
My father worked he didn't work in the coal mines. He always worked in the office. He never worked in the mine. And that was, and then when the mines closed, he had different clerical positions.
Okay.
When he passed away, he was working at Neodata, which was Esquire at that time.
And when did he die?
He died in 1953.
Okay, okay. Now, your mom, I know that she took care of the home and she was a cook and did that her whole life. Do you remember any specific things about her, any stories about her that you'd like to share with us?
Well, you know, on our block where we lived, there was the Thompsons, the Stevens, and in those days we all, you know, would they'd all get together in the evenings at each other's house, or in the daytime the ladies would sit on their front porches and gather on one of the neighbors' front porch. They all did embroidery work, and the children always just played, and their social time was mostly just visiting with neighbors.
Okay. And they did, now you told me that you didn't have a car when you were young,
No,
right?
no.
Okay. So how did you get around town, you and your
We,
family?
we walked.
We walked everywhere you went?
Oh yes,
Okay.
everybody walked. Very few people had automobiles in those
Okay,
days.
okay.
Mhm.
And did they deliver milk and things in those days?
Oh no, no. You know, we didn't have refrigerators.
Okay.
We had. I remember having
Ice box.
ice boxes,
Okay.
they call it, and once a week a truck would come and deliver ice in a block of ice,
Mhm.
and we children would run out when the truck would come and get ice chips from the truck.
Okay, so that was kind of a treat?
Oh yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And where did you do your shopping? Tell me a little bit about the stores. And
Oh, and Louisville had all kinds of stores, but it's unbelievable for the population how many stores we had compared to the population now and the stores that we have. There was almost a grocery store on every corner. On our street, there was across from where I live now was Kate Alara. Have you ever been told about Kate Alara? Kate Alara had a grocery store. Down the street was Ed Smith. On the corner where the historical museum is was Jekyll. Downtown was Luke McCorkle. And then there was Thrillaways, had a store in the next block. And Chris Rosenbaum had called the Red and White store, where about that would be about where the melting pot in that block right there was. So there were plenty of stores. And the population probably was maybe 1,500, I don't know.
Wow.
So compared to the population now, we don't have that many grocery stores, do we?
Now, did they sell mostly food? in those
They
stores?
sold food, and of course bakery trucks used to come in, or they would get bakery goods. I remember my mother, when she was a young girl, she worked at Kate Alara's store, and she said there was a bakery in Boulder that they got their bakery rolls and from.
Okay. And how, did people have accounts at the stores, or did they pay in cash or per month, or how did
You
that
know, in those days, people were mostly miners and work was seasonal. The summer, the mines didn't work. So my mother, this is what my mother, heard from my mother, that people would they'd go to the grocery store and they had an account. And they just say, put it on my bill. And then when the mines would go back to work, she says, and the people would pay off their grocery bill.
Yeah, so that was pretty understanding.
But you said but in those days, of course, food was not very inexpensive
Mm-hmm. Yes, Barb?
compared to what now.
You talked about two bakeries. You were saying the other day Tommy Cable had a bakery and somebody else.
Oh, well, that was later. That was after the war.
Oh.
Tommy Cable, I can't remember if Tommy, I know Fatty Martello had, I think it was where the marketplace was, in that block. In fact, Fatty made my wedding cake.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Mhm.
So did Fatty Martella and Tom Cable have a bakery together?
I can't remember, Chris, I can't remember if Tommy started and then Fatty took over, but because they were both bakers in the service,
Mm-hmm.
and they did have a bakery shop.
Did you have a garden when you were a child at your house?
I think we had a small garden.
Mhm.
I don't know.
I seem to remember something about pole beans being brought from Italy.
About
Your
what?
family having pole beans, the seeds.
Oh, my grandfather brought. They had green beans, and then they were. You planted the seed, then you had to have a pole that they grew around the pole, and he brought that seed from Italy, and we still enjoy those beans. We had a good crop this year, didn't we, Barbara?
Wow, that's very neat.
Mm-hmm.
Very neat. Now, when you were little, who were your good friends that you played with?
Dolores Prillo was my best friend, and I spent a lot of time at her house. And at that time, when we were in grade school, her dad had what the Ford garage, and that would be where the Chase Bank is now on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a lot of times there. They lived upstairs. And then the bottom part was the garage part, and of course the back of the garage was a huge area, and we spent a lot of time roller skating and playing in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you roller skated a lot with your friends.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Okay. And you went to school at St. Louis.
Hmm.
Okay. And did you have uniforms at that time?
Did what?
You had uniforms at that time?
We did. We had. Uh, I think when I was in the lower grades, we had navy blue skirts and a white midi top.
Okay.
But that we didn't have them the whole time. That was just for a very short time that we wore.
Now, were the grades all separate, or did they have grades together?
Oh, the grades were together. There was three classrooms, and it was from. Didn't continue the kindergarten class, and so they had three grades, first and second in one room, third, fourth, and fifth in the second room, and sixth, seventh, and eighth in the third room.
Oh, so you went to school through 8th grade at that
And
school.
of course, it's still where the Catholic school is today. That's where we went to school.
Did the kids all play together?
Oh, well, in those days, the boys played on one side of the school, and we played on the other side of the playground. We weren't allowed to play together.
Okay. But you had classes together. You could
Oh,
be in
yes,
class
uh-huh.
together.
Oh, yes.
And I assume they were very strict?
Oh, very strict. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. What are some of your best memories of school? What did you enjoy about elementary school?
Well, of course, the classes were small, and we knew everybody, and we had a great time, on the playground. We played ball. We had teeter-totters, and
And your art days with Miss Jenny.
hmm?
And Miss Jenny would come and teach you art.
Oh, yeah.
Fridays?
And on Friday afternoons, we had, I guess what they call it now, special activities or extracurricular activities. That's what it's called. We'd have art or sewing. And Jenny Milano, she worked for Father Benedict. She was his housekeeper. And she would come over on Friday afternoons, and we would, when we were in the lower grades, we did coloring, and we color, of course, those days all we had was Crayolas, and then they had a white cloth that you put on your finger, and you shaded, your picture, the colors out. And then when we got into the older 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we had sewing, and they taught us to embroider.
Oh, sounds great. Did you ever have any cooking classes then too?
Not in Catholic school,
Not in
no.
Catholic school. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Did you have a favorite teacher when you were there?
In Catholic school?
Mhm.
No, the nuns were all very nice at that time. They were all young girls.
Mhm.
Just, they're very, very nice.
And then you went on from there to high school.
High school.
And the high school at that time was where at what location?
That's where the middle school is. That was
On
our
Main
high
Street.
school.
Okay.
And of course, everyone walked to school in those days. The only ones that had automobiles were the children that came in from Davidson area that had
Oh, okay.
to have a car to come to school. But we all walked. We all walked to school.
So people came from a long distance. Did Superior have a high school then?
No,
So they came
there
from
we had the kids from Superior, and then the Davidson
Mhm.
Did
area.
Broomfield have a high school then?
Was Broomfield coming too? The children in Broomfield, did they come to high school in Louisville?
No, not to high school.
Okay.
The only time the Broomfield children came was when Barbara was in Catholic school, and the children that wanted to go to Catholic school before Broomfield built their Catholic school did come to the elementary, to the St. Louis Elementary.
Okay. Okay.
For about 2 or 3 years, I think they came here.
How big was your class at high school?
I think my 8th grade graduating class was about, I really don't know. I know there wasn't 20, I don't think. And my high school graduating class was very small because that was during the war, and a lot of the boys had quit school and gone and enlisted in service.
Mhm.
And I think we had about only 5 or 6 boys in our graduating class. And it was about 22 or 23 people, which was a small class for high school at that time.
Very small. What kind of extracurricular activities did they have at high school?
And when I went to high school, they really did. I think the girls had volleyball. That was about all. And, of course, they had football for the boys. But they didn't have the extracurricular activities that they have when you and Barbara went to school, of course.
Right, right. What about clubs? Did they ever have clubs like FBLA, you know?
Well, now in Catholic school, we had what we called a Pi Epsilon Club, which was a social club for all the students. Well, it was for the probably the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Mhm.
And I think we met once a month and had a social hour and that was, and then of course in high school the only club that I remember belonging to was the honorary society of commercial students
Okay.
that Miss Wagner had.
Oh, Miss Wagner. I've heard good stories about her. I hear she was very difficult.
She was a very, very good teacher.
Yeah, very, very good teacher. And it was pretty easy to get a job if you'd been in her class because
Yeah.
everyone knew you knew your
Yes.
stuff. Oh, okay. Trying to make sure we don't forget anything here. Okay, so you went to St. Louis then, and you were interested in nursing. That was something that you got into. When did you decide that you might be interested in the career of nursing?
I think I always wanted to be a nurse. I can remember when I was a youngster playing hospital and playing nurse, you know. And
So when you decided you wanted to go, how did you find out what was available for you for college?
well, I had a scholarship to CU, and but that was a 5-year program, and at that time, of course, it was the war, and I wanted to go to St. Joe's Hospital in Denver, and they had a program called the Cadet Nurse Corps, and it was associated with the government, and had the war not ended, when we finished our schooling, we would have automatically been in the Army Nurse Corps.
Okay. And how long was that program?
It was 3 years.
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in Denver?
Denver, St. Joe's Hospital. Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have a car, so how did you get to Denver?
There was train,
Okay.
and the buses.
Did you go by yourself? Was there anyone that went with you? Did you go with others?
Gloria Hawkins
Okay.
went, and Victoria Mehevic went, but she didn't continue. She was only there a short time.
Okay.
But Gloria and I finished.
And as you went to school, did you also work at the hospital in Denver?
Oh yes,
Same time?
you worked 8 hours and had classes. During the war, it was a shortage of nurses, and we had to do everything. We did. Now we had our classes. We had to take care of patients, and not only that, we had to help clean the rooms.
Wow.
We did 8-hour shift, and then plus classes. So it was like probably a 12-hour day.
Monday through Friday.
Pardon?
Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, 12 hours per day.
Oh yeah. Well, we lived there at the hospital.
So they had dorms?
They had what they called the nurses' home, and the building is still there. It's now offices, but yeah, and we all lived in the nurses' home.
And you graduated from nursing school in what year?
1947.
Okay. And you went straight on to work?
Then I worked. I worked in a doctor's office for a little bit, and then I went. Then the hospital called me and asked me if I'd like to come back and work at the hospital, which I did
And that hospital was
at St.
at
Joe's.
St. Joe's. Okay.
And then, of course, I was married in 1948, and I worked at St. Joe's until till Barbara was 1952, and Barbara was born.
Okay. Okay. And you were married in 1948 to Lawrence.
Mhm.
Would you tell us a little bit about how you met Lawrence and how old you were when you met him?
Of course, he came to Louisville when he was 12 years old,
Okay.
and the families were friends, and
Where did he live? Where did his family live?
he lived just down the street, 3 doors down on 900 block
Okay.
of Lafarge.
And he worked at one of the grocery stores?
Pardon?
When he was young, did he work at one of the grocery stores when he was
Oh,
young?
when he was in high school.
Okay.
Luke McCorkle, in those days they delivered your groceries, and Yeah, Lawrence, after school, he would drive the delivery truck. And Dolores and I were walking home from school down Main Street, and he's going down, he'd stop and put us in the back of the truck, but give us a ride home.
So he'd be driving and you'd be in the back of the truck, and so that's how you met him? So you were the same age as he was? You were 12?
He was, we were the same age, but he was a year, I had to be in school because when he moved from Illinois when he was 12 years old, he started school when he was 5, so he was a grade ahead of me, but we were actually the same age.
Now, did you start dating him before he went off to the service?
No, it was when he came back from the service.
Okay, and which branch did he serve in?
Pardon?
Which branch of the military did Lawrence serve
In the Navy.
He was in the Navy. How many years was he in the Navy?
Pardon?
How many years was he in?
Well, he went right after high school, and I think he was in, let's see, 18, about 2.5 to 3 years. I really don't remember.
Did you correspond during that time when he was gone at all?
No, not really.
So he came back and he was about 21, 22?
21, I think.
Okay. So at that point in time, he comes back to town and you're still there. And
And we, you know, the group of us that ran around together, he was in that group. And I don't know, it just
kind of happened, huh?
happened.
All right, all right. And you were married in 1948,
Mhm.
Lawrence. Did you have a big wedding?
Yeah, yes. Mhm.
Where did you get married?
We got married at St. Louis, and of course the reception was at the Redmond Hall,
Okay.
like all the receptions were in those days. And then we lived in Denver for about 10 months, and then we moved back to Louisville.
Okay. So you didn't live in Denver too long, but Lawrence did work in Denver for quite a long time.
Oh yes, Lawrence worked in Denver 30-some years until he retired.
Okay. And
And
what
then-
did he do in Denver?
Pardon?
What did he do? What was his job? and
He
who did
worked. He
for?
worked at the Air Force Finance Center. He was the manager of safety, I guess.
Oh, okay. And after he finished working there, did he work in Louisville after that?
After he retired from there, he went to work with the Bank of Louisville until he passed away.
And he was involved in many activities and many organizations.
Very many. Mhm.
Okay. Could you tell us a few of those organizations that he was involved with?
That he was involved in.
Right.
Well, he was involved in all the organizations.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything that he wasn't involved in.
Like the Moose and the Lions?
Oh, he was.
and-
He
FW.
we belonged to the Elks, the Moose. We had the Lions, the Duck Club,
The Legion,
the Legion,
Ducks Unlimited?
and he was
Rotary,
um,
Rotary, Rotary,
the Rotary, of course, and I don't.
Podcast,
He was on the Boulder Valley.
Foundation for Boulder Valley Schools,
What was it? The
Foundation for Boulder
Foundation
And
Board,
in his spare time, he was a judge.
and he was the municipal judge in Louisville for 17 years.
Wow.
Mhm.
So he was very, very busy doing things, and you were both involved with the Catholic Church as well.
Yes.
Correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So that was a long involvement there. Were you ever able to take vacations with all the things you were so busy
Oh yes,
doing?
we took.
Where did you go when you took vacations as a family?
We went to California almost every year to visit. Well, you remember the friends of ours because you
I
visited them
do,
with
yeah.
Barbara one
We
Christmas,
went when we were like 18.
and
or
we
something.
went for 30 years, I think, every year to visit. And of course, we still go to see Joanne because her parents are not living anymore. And then we went to New York. We went to Washington D.C. We went to into Arizona, South Dakota. We went. In those days, we did most of the traveling by auto.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you did a lot of driving
Yeah,
on
we,
those vacations. Okay.
We-
Tell me about your holidays as a family when you were little as well as when you were older. Did you have certain things that you did during the holidays, certain things you baked, made?
well, we did some of the Christmas baking, but our family was small, so we didn't have a huge gathering on the holidays. Lawrence's parents and my parents and it was just a small family.
Mm-hmm. But I think you did a lot of cooking too. I remember that there was a lot of food involved. Grandma
Oh, yeah.
Enrietto used to do
Oh
a
yeah,
lot of-
Grandma Mary did a lot of a lot of cooking. My mother.
Did you have specific cookies or breads like that?
Always pizzelles.
So you made pizzelles a lot? during those
Pizzelles.
times?
We just made mostly pizzelles in those days. We
And the
do more of
twisters.
the baking now.
And like the fried dough, the twisters.
Oh, yes.
We made those for the holiday.
hmm
Okay. And the Christmas tree downtown, did you go down there as a child?
Oh, yes,
to the
we
Christmas
went,
tree?
and I brought Barbara down there. Of course, you probably went
Yeah,
as a
I
child
did
to get your sack of candy from the Lions Club used to do
Right.
that. And wasn't G.R. Henning, the Santa Claus for 1,000 years?
I think so.
and and of course, the story that Louisville people remember was the doctor in town, Dr. Bartholomew. Have you heard of him?
Mhm.
He had a group of his friends out one Christmas during the holidays, and I guess they had a little too much to drink, and they were trying to climb the Christmas tree. Have you ever heard that story?
No.
Yeah.
And did it work?
No one
tip it
was
over?
hauled off.
Yeah.
No one got hurt.
No.
Oh my goodness. Now that's funny. I had never heard that story, too. That was really funny. When did you have your first car? Did you start driving before you were married at all, or did you guys get a car after that?
Well,
How did that happen?
of course, Lawrence had a car, you know,
Okay.
and we were married. And those days, most of us only had one car,
Mhm.
and I think I probably learned to drive after I was married.
Okay. Who taught you?
Lawrence, I think, taught me to drive.
Was he a patient teacher?
hmm
Okay. Alrighty. Goodness, we have most of these covered here. What are some of your hobbies? You know, it sounds like you were busy raising a child and you had your nursing. Did you have hobbies too?
Not really, because in those days, when we were first married, of course, we had card clubs.
Mhm.
You know, the women had a card club, and then the couples had a card club, and then of course, and most of our we did a lot of, in those days. People visited a lot back and forth in the homes.
Okay.
There
So
wasn't
there were things to do that didn't cost money that you could just do.
well, and then we didn't really go out of town that much in those days, except to go shopping.
Okay.
And that wasn't, you know, we didn't go to, we go to Denver maybe once every 6 weeks or whatever.
Where do you remember going in Denver when you did your shopping?
Oh,
Any special places?
16th Street.
Oh, okay.
hmm
Do you remember some of the stores on 16th Street?
Oh, yes,
at that time?
I used to love to go shopping. I'd start on one end of 16th Street, go up one side and down the other, and start usually at the May Company and go all the way up one side and 16th Street and come back down the other, and,
All right.
and spend the whole day in Denver.
Oh, sounds like fun.
hmm
Okay.
And you take the train there, or would you drive it?
Well, I used to, sometimes I would take the bus, and then Lawrence would pick me up after work and meet me at the May Company, you know.
So you just hang out by yourself, just be there by yourself.
Well, and then Gloria Hawkins and I used to go, and we'd go to the movie and spend the day and have lunch and spend the day in Denver. That was,
That sounds like fun.
mhm.
You know, during the time that you were a youngster and you know, in your early life too, there were a lot of big things that happened. You know, the war, the Depression, you know, the Monarch mine explosion, things like that. And you told me a little bit about the dark, you know, like when the war was on too, how you had to blacken the
Oh, we
windows.
had
Can you
blackout
tell us a little bit about
practices.
that, the blackout?
Yeah, we had blackout practices.
How did that work? How did
Well, they would, the siren would blow, and then you would, everybody turn out their lights, and then each block or so had, what were they called? I can't remember what they called them, but they would check on all the houses. They were maybe block leaders or something.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
what their title was. And I remember on our street, John Lehrer was the one that would come and check.
So they would just make sure your lights were all off at that time.
Mhm.
Okay. And I know that when the Monarch mine exploded, didn't you have some neighbors who were killed? in
There were
that
two
explosion?
men on my street. The man lived across the street, and the man that lived next door to us were killed in that explosion.
And the man that lived next door, what was his name?
It was Steve Davis, and of course across the street was Tom Stevens.
Okay. And did they leave behind wives?
Uh, Tom was married to his wife, and he had a son about, let's see, was that in 1936, I
Mhm,
think?
36, right.
So I'd have been 10 years old, so Donald was probably about 6 or 7 years old when his father was killed in the mine explosion. The man next door, they didn't have any children.
And they were from Europe too, weren't they? The Davises?
They were from Wales.
Okay.
Mhm.
How did you know that the Monarch mine had exploded? How did people find out about that?
Of course, in those days, anything of an emergency or the siren would blow, and the siren blew. It's early in the morning, I think about 6 o'clock, and it just kept blowing and blowing and blowing. So you knew that something terrible had happened, and then the word spread that there had been a mine explosion.
How did the family that was left behind, the families, I should say, because there were numerous ones, how did they make it financially? Was there, money that the mine provided
You
to
know,
the families?
I would suppose they got some compensation, but I imagine it was very small. The lady next door to me, she never went to work or anything, so I don't know about their finances. But Josie Stevens across the street, she had this young boy, and then you remember in those days we had the telephone office in Louisville on Main Street, and they had telephone operators.
Right.
And she got a job at the telephone office as the telephone operator, and then she moved, worked there a few years, and then she was able to get a job as a telephone manager and moved to Milliken and Berthoud area.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
And the Davis family, she was from Wales, and they didn't have any other family here, did they?
No, she didn't
So
have
was
any
by herself.
family. She had a niece that would come occasionally to visit her. Mhm.
Something else I wanted to ask you about.
I think the niece lived in Greeley or somewhere.
Okay. Wasn't there a member of your family that was a firefighter too, a volunteer firefighter? Did you have someone in your family that was
They
a
were-
fireman?
Well, my dad was
Your dad was a
my
fireman?
dad was a volunteer. It was they were all volunteers then.
So
Yeah.
were most of the men in town volunteer firefighters?
Oh yeah.
All of them?
Mhm.
Okay.
And of course, when the whistle would blow, they'd all report to the fire hall.
Where was the fire hall in those days?
The first fire hall I remember, I think, was down. I think it was like next to what there's a restaurant there now where Bud Tharp had his garage.
Oh, the garage
Because
on
the town,
Main and
the town hall was right next to that, and I think the fire. I'm not really sure about where the fire station was.
Okay.
Come to think about it.
Okay. Were there any big fires in town in those days? Do you remember anything like that?
I don't remember any big fires, but the other emergency that I remember, the whistle blowing in the middle of the night, and it was a terrible rainstorm, and the whistle just blew and blew and blew, so you knew there was something horrible happening. At that time, we had a doctor by the name of Dr. Boyd that lived in town, and he and his wife were coming home from Denver, and the bridge down by Mayhoffers the creek had flooded, and when they came over the bridge, they went into the creek, and his wife was drowned.
Oh, wow.
And so that was something that I remembered, and how scary it was in the middle of the night hearing this whistle keep blowing. And my dad, of course, responded to the fire call, and that's how when he came home, he said Dr. Boyd's wife was drowned.
Did you have phones in your house? Were there phones in those days? What kind of phone service did you have?
That's another kind of interesting thing. We didn't have phones. Not very many people had telephones when I was growing up, and my friend Dolores Prilla, her mother was a telephone operator, and Jenny, worked at In fact, they owned that building, the brick building that was the telephone office at that time. That belonged to Rome. And I remember in those days, if someone tried to call you and they would, Dolores and I, oftentimes, Jenny would call us and we'd go to the person's house and say, you have a telephone call, but they'd have to go down to the telephone office to get their call. And then another thing that's interesting, when we all started getting telephones, we had like numbers like 26R or whatever. And of course they had telephone operators. And again, Jenny Milano, which was a great person, the telephone operators. And in those, when we'd call, we never said, you'd had to ring, and instead of saying what number you want, 26R, you just say, ring up Chris Warnberg, and Jenny'd say, oh, she's not home today, she went shopping. So,
Small town.
it was a small town, yeah.
And then there were party lines, weren't there too?
Oh yes, party lines. You had maybe one ring or two rings, or if you want a three-party ring, and you had three rings.
I wanted to ask you, when you were young, did your family, did they speak Italian around you, or did everyone have to start speaking English?
My maternal grandparents spoke Italian, but my parents didn't. We never spoke Italian at home.
Did you learn how to speak Italian from them?
No,
or
I
did they
never
not?
did. I never did.
I understood many of the families didn't really want their children to speak their native language. They wanted them
Yeah.
to speak English.
Which I regret that I didn't learn to speak it. No, in fact, I can remember when I was probably before I started school, and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. They spoke Italian. I remember saying to my mother one time, when you get old, will you speak like Grandma and Grandpa? Because I thought, that was the language of old people.
Sure. Okay. You mentioned to me one day that when I was here last time that the women in the mornings, on Monday morning, they would rush to get their laundry
yeah.
out. Can you tell us that story?
Oh, it was, that was kind of on our block. The ladies would see who could hang the first piece of clothing on the line, get.
And they were using the old Ringer wash
the old
machine,
Ringer wash
so it
machine.
took a long time, and so it was kind of a contest to see who got their laundry out first. Okay. Well, I think that that's a lot of the questions I wanted to ask. You've been in Louisville for a long time, and you've seen a lot of changes. What are some of the positive things that you've seen happen that you think are great in Louisville over the years?
In Louisville?
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, I think and when I grew up, we had to go to Boulder or Denver for want to go to the movie. Well, we had the Rex Theater here. We did have that. But then when the Boulder Theater, that was a treat to go to the Boulder Theater. And like if you wanted any special shopping, you had to go to Boulder, you had to go to Denver. We did have, there were two clothing stores, Mangus's and the Hub Store, where you could get shoes and clothing. In town, did have that besides our grocery stores, but other than that, we didn't have a variety of shopping that the other cities had. So it was always a treat when we got to go to Denver or to go to Boulder shopping.
And so now you have a lot more selection that it's closer by.
Oh, of course.
What about the rec center? Is that something that you've been able to use?
I have not used it personally very much, but it's been wonderful to have that because, of course, we had nothing like that. And I can remember when the rec center opened, how excited everyone was about that. And, of course, I think all the things that we have in Louisville now that we didn't have, and if we wanted, we had to go to, like I said, to Boulder or Denver. I think it's wonderful that we have all those things right here. Like in our day, another thing when we were young, as we got older, did have access to automobiles. Going to the Boulder, to the Nifty next to that was a drive-in. Of course, Louisville didn't have anything like that, a drive-in. So now we have McDonald's, Wendy's, we have all these things right here that when I was a child, we didn't have all that.
Is there anything you miss that we had when you were much younger that you do you think is sad about not having anymore?
Well, I think, yes, I do. because I think when we were growing up, we played um, on the street corners, kick the can, baseball, and whatever. And now everybody has to get in the car and go somewhere to have fun. Or they're also involved in Little League and all these activities that we didn't have to didn't have to attend. So we had to, make our own good times and fun. And I think it was simpler in those days, but I think people were happier, and we had less than people had now. But we didn't have televisions. We didn't have, a lot of us didn't have indoor plumbing or heating. I can remember going to Catholic school and we all sit around the potbelly stove, and the days that it'd be so cold, and Father Benedict at that time, we all was required to go to Mass, of course, in the morning, then go to the school, and we'd all huddle around the stove. It was cold, and Father would come and say, well, I think it's too cold today for the children to have school, so we won't have. Of course, we were delighted we got to go home.
Anytime that could happen. Are there any other stories or anything else you'd like to tell us that we haven't asked today?
No.
Not really? Okay. Barb, is there anything you wanted to add at all?
I think people were happier with less in those days. I think now we're all wanting this, wanting that. I grew up without television. Of course, you and Barbara grew up with television, and we were content to stay home on Friday nights and just listen to the radio. And now,
So if you were to give advice to young people
even in your
now,
day, you and Barbara on Friday nights had to be going somewhere.
That's true. True. So if you were to give advice now to your grandchildren or great-grandchildren on some of the things that they should really pay attention to in their life and appreciate in life, what would that be?
Well, I think that and our children are accustomed to having, our grandchildren, having so much, and of course I think a lot of that's the grandparents' fault, because we do spoil them and give them everything they want. And maybe it would be better if we do like my mother used to always tell the girls about the olden days and how they had to do without, and they'd say, oh, Granny, we don't want to hear about the olden days. But I think they need to know about the olden days, that it always wasn't like this.
I think it's really good to be able to hear about the olden days and to appreciate those days and everything that everyone's been through.
Yes, they take it for granted now, and I imagine maybe you can remember when we first got television, how excited we were about television. Well, now, if they don't have a television in every room, they're not content.
True. Is it on?
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about the uniqueness of living in a small town, and you shared with me a story about speaking to a friend of yours that was very surprised that you were cooking so much. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, here in Louisville, if anyone has a death in the family, it was customary from when I grew up that you made a house visit, a condolence call, and you brought food, or you fixed dinner for them, or whatever. If anybody had sickness, you did the same. And this friend of mine lives in Denver, says, we don't even know our next door neighbor. We don't know. It was amazed at how, when anything happens in the community like Louisville, how people respond and support each other.
And you think that's a small town kind of thing?
I think it's a small town. That's Louisville, I think.
And I think even though it's gotten bigger, it's still part of who we are.
Well, I think we who grew up here, that's still the way we do things. And I know Barbara is very good about next door neighbor. Her mother been ill. Barbara, last week we fixed dinner. Her mother's come home from the hospital, and we fixed dinner and sent it over for them. And people in the city don't do things like that.
And I think it is because we don't know enough about each other, or we don't know our neighbors.
Well, they don't even know their next door neighbors.
Yeah,
And I suppose maybe here in Louisville, some people it's the same way in some areas, but people who grew up in Louisville like we did, that we do that. That's just part of our culture.
Well, and a lot of the people that you know, I'm sure, are the children of people that you knew and grandchildren of people
Of
that
course.
you knew too.
And
You
like,
think very many people have stayed in Louisville? The
well,
older
now not so
generations?
many stay. Like, um, my generation stayed. Some of your generation stayed, but the next generation didn't. But you know, like I say, when I spoke with my friend Dolores Perilla, uh, our grandmothers were friends, our mothers were friends, we were friends, our children were friends. So there's like 4 generations that we were friends. And so you have kind of a special feeling for those people.
Yeah, it's a very
It's
special
almost,
history together.
it's almost like an extended family.
It's true. It's true. Well, thank you. This has been fun.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
And Justin.
All right.